We'll be talking to Randy Staples from Idaho Weekly Briefing in just a moment on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. 8:43 and 77. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story. I do want to remind folks, though, that coming up on Wednesday morning between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, we'll be joined by one of the medical pros from Tripp Family Medicine right here in Twin Falls, located on Fillmore Street, directly across from the main post office. And just a reminder, Dr. Tripp and his family are going on a mission trip to Nicaragua next month. And he is taking his sons along, but they have to pay their own way. And in order to do that, they have to do a lot of work, cleaning up people's lawns, perhaps doing a lot of mowing, cleaning out garages, cleaning pools. And he says if you're looking for someone to do that work for you in the next few weeks, give his office a telephone call, and they will set that up. Do want to remind you they're still looking for new patients, and they can often see you on the very same day that you have a health issue. 8:44, and Randy joining us this morning. First of all, welcome back to the program after a couple of weeks away.
Yeah, good to be here.
We were just talking off air. Last summer, I guess we had some experience with it wasn't the worst ever, but I remember you telling me it was still a rough fire season, and we see a lot of these natural disasters that occur, sometimes not always natural. I think you've mentioned one of the worst fires was started by somebody dragging metal from their vehicle on the road. But over the years, Idaho has experienced a lot of what we would call acts of God, I guess it used to be called by insurance companies. And we were just chatting off air about the 40th anniversary. We've reached the 40th anniversary of the Teton Dam collapse, and you were working as a young reporter, and you did some retrospective work on that after it happened way back in 1976.
I did one of those. I was working at the time for the Nampa Caldwell paper, and a year after the flood happened. The flood was in '76, in I believe June of '76, and the year after, I had traveled across over to the Rexburg and Idaho Falls area to look around and chat with a few people about the years since. And it really was kind of remarkable how fast a lot of the redevelopment had happened, but you could still see a good deal of the fact that there had been a major disaster, that people were killed, injured, and that there was a tremendous amount of damage in that area. And a lot, remarkably though, had been done by way of already bringing it back. And within a few years, within 5-10 years, the casual observer who didn't know the history of the area probably wouldn't have easily been able to figure out that something like that had happened. But it was a huge event, and it upended a lot of lives at the time.
In fact, from what I understand, a lot of people, the day it happened, were just completely caught by surprise. They didn't expect anything like that could happen because it was a relatively new project, almost brand new, and unfortunately, because of that, a lot of them didn't follow the warnings or the of what was coming.
Yeah, there were some warnings of a sort. But they weren't really taken that seriously. And as you point out, the dam it's not as though this was a very old dam that was in need of repair in that sense. It was a dam that had some initial problems going in that some people had warned about at a fairly early stage. It was built in kind of a problematic location. And the day came when within the space of a couple of hours, you went from a very slight leak and a very slight crack to the thing just collapsed. And there was not a lot of time to move. People were dependent on getting the word within about a half hour or maybe 45-minute span of time. And even now, that would be, you wouldn't necessarily be able to contact people that easily, but it would be a lot easier now than it was then. At that time, especially once a lot of the phone lines and things like that were knocked out, you didn't have a lot of the means of communication that you might have now. And mostly what you had was radio. And people were dependent on that to get the word out, to tell people to get out of there, to move out of the way of the floodwaters.
We are joined by Randy Staples this morning from Idaho Weekly Briefing. It's 8:48:77. Bill Colley with you on Top Story as well on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. You have been writing about the state Republican convention, and I admit I was not here for the raucous one 2 years ago. I got to witness proceedings the last few days, but I think it surprised people that it ended so quietly, and people walked away from it without any serious bumps or bruises.
Well, I think there were a few reasons for that. One was the fact that there were so many bumps and bruises 2 years ago. That was a really a pretty ugly event, and I think that probably a good many people that showed up at this one took the attitude that they didn't want a repeat of that. That there was no advantage to be had from doing the same thing over again. But in addition to that, 2 years ago, the party had just gone through a pretty raucous primary season as well, and candidates up and down the ticket, one office after another, congressional offices, statewide offices, a lot of legislative offices, had major campaigns in which incumbents were being heavily challenged. And this year, there really wasn't much of that. Of course, there were no statewide elections this year, which in some sense helped. But also there was this year there may have been, for example, a challenge to Mike Simpson in the second congressional district, but it was not the kind of really strong, full-throated challenge that he had 2 years ago. It was a very different kind of thing. So it made it, I think, a good deal easier for people to get along, and there wasn't the immediate basis, the immediate uh, uh, anger level that a lot of people would have had at that time.
I took note of some of the remarks made by Steve Yates, the state chairman, and then Mike Crapo and Raul Labrador. All of them, I think, made the point that the real focus seems to be on the national this year because there's a lot of concern among Republicans about the direction of the country and that we're seeing it slip away. They all did mention that Donald Trump had not been their first choice. Labrador got a huge laugh when he pointed out that he had 16 other choices before Trump, but was now backing him. And yet that was their main message was they had to walk out of there and be unified in going into the national election. And it really has eclipsed what's taken place on the state and local levels.
Well, the attention level certainly is on the national is much higher, and it puts a lot of Idaho Republicans in a little bit of an odd spot because this was not one of the states that Trump won. Ted Cruz won Idaho and won it fairly decisively, and that was at a point when Trump was nationally overall in a pretty big lead. Uh, Idaho did not turn out to be a Trump state, and it probably puts a good many Republicans in a little bit of an uneasy position just on that kind of basis, and on the basis that a good deal of what Trump said isn't what a lot of Idaho Republicans have been hearing and saying for a long stretch of time.
I had that feeling. I was talking to delegates on the floor, and there was that discussion about getting behind Trump. But I talked to delegates who are still very uncomfortable about what really has been, I guess, a shotgun marriage between Republican Party faithful and the candidate, and yet there is this belief that they don't really have any other choice, and I guess you're seeing that play out as well.
Well, nationally, that's certainly I think that's the case to one degree or another nationally. There's certainly a large portion of the Republican base that from pretty early on and uh, and moving on has has been supporting Donald Trump, but there are a whole lot of others who have not been, and it's been a very uneasy kind of thing, and I suspect that that's going to have some implications later on. That there's quite a bit of difference between being really supportive of someone and on the one hand, and on the other hand saying, well, what choice do I have? Uh, it really is quite a distinction because I haven't heard this kind of reaction coming out of a nominee for either party in my lifetime. Not to this extent. Uh, Certainly, Mitt Romney had the party's support. Period. And pretty enthusiastic after he won the nomination, even among people for whom he was not their first or maybe even second choice. But he was close enough to what they thought, close enough to what they liked, that they could get behind him without having to go through any kinds of hard permutations. But Trump is a different animal in that sense.
For sure. It's 8:54. Randy Staples from Idaho Weekly Briefing joining us. We have 77 degrees. Randy, for people who'd actually like to check out the briefing, where would you send them?
I would send them to www.ridenbaugh.com. That's RIDENBAUGH.
Now, earlier this morning, I sent you an email, and I expressed my surprise because there's a lot of discussion that Trump is going to harm down-ballot Republicans, and yet we don't see, especially in the congressional races in Idaho, we don't see necessarily the Democrats. There are opponents, but no one seems to be grabbing the bull by the horns and trying to take advantage of that.
I think I think the effect of that is going to vary depending on what the state is. If you've got, on the one hand, a very blue state, it's probably not going to make too much difference one way or the other. It's a state that was strongly going to say reelect a Democrat is probably going to continue to reelect a Democrat. And in Idaho, where you would have to switch so many votes, make such a large difference to seriously challenge a candidate, a Republican candidate, it's going to be very difficult to do that. What you've got in Idaho is 4 incumbents, 3 of which will be on the ballot, each of whom have been getting super landslide majorities for years, and it would take a whole lot to seriously threaten that, and I don't really see that happening.
Just a quick note: we've dropped 9 degrees, so we may be having a shower. I can't see with no windows, without windows in this building, but just to let you know that our temperature has dropped to 68. Randy Staples is our guest on Top Story this morning. For people out there who are tracking this, it also, we should know, we don't have candidates don't have to report on a weekly basis how much money they've raised, but it does appear that the Democrats who are challenging in these races are having a difficult time finding anyone who will help finance their campaigns.
That's often a difficulty in Idaho, especially as the years have gone on, and Democrats have had such a great difficulty getting elected. The money very often follows the realistic prospect that a candidate is going to win. That's very often money tends to go toward winners and toward success in that sense. And if you're in Idaho and you're trying to make the case that I need money for my campaign, the immediate question is, well, how are you going to win? And that's become a very difficult question to answer.
And I would think that when you're going to some of the big donors as well, and they're looking at those past numbers, they tell you, well, you may be a very nice fellow, but sorry.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly what does happen quite a bit. There are very few that are willing to throw money in just for the idea that we need to have some visibility for an alternative point of view. There's the serious money comes when you have someone who at least presents a serious argument that maybe I can win, and I'm not really sure. In Idaho, even with the Trump situation, being there, how that's going to play out. I think that would be rather different in states that are a little bit closer to purple. But in Idaho, I don't see the presidential situation changing the in-state situation all that much.
Randy, once more for people who would like to check out the site, what's the address?
It is www.ridenbaugh.com. That's RIDENBAUGH.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to speaking with you again next Monday morning, and hope you have a great week.
We'll talk to you then.
Take care, sir. Randy Staples joining us on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. I'd like to mention coming up about 9:20 this morning, We're at 8:59, but at 9:20 this morning, Chris Anderson from the Herritt Center at the College of Southern Idaho expected to join us. That's on the way right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX. It's 69.